This video is brought to you by Brilliant. We're now roughly 3 weeks into the campaign, and, well, things really haven't gotten any better for the Tories. They're still behind in the polls, and they're being squeezed on the right from the Reform UK party, something that has only been made worse by the return of Nigel Farage. What Sunak desperately wanted when he called the election was a tightening in the polls, seeing his poll numbers slowly creep up on Starmer's, and the electorate beginning to realise that in these difficult economic times, what they needed was a competent leader who'd already put the graft in and's able to begin lowering taxes. Unfortunately for Sunak, this is not the view the electorate's taken, and not only has the poll gap with Labour stayed the same, or in some cases widened, but some polls are putting Reform UK basically level with them. So with this in mind, it's worth asking, how bad actually is it for the Tories? What caused this? And ultimately, could this be the end of the Tory party as we know it? Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So it's worth starting by explaining exactly how we got to this situation. Now, Labour have been ahead in the polls since basically the start of 2022, right after the Partygate scandal properly kicked off. As a result of this, they maintained a roughly 8-point lead over the Tories. While this is impressive, things did get quite a bit worse. In September, the Johnson government fell apart and Truss took over. The result of this was a huge widening in the polls, one that saw Labour achieve a huge 25-point poll lead over the Tories. While this quickly settled back down to a 20-point poll lead, this has not really shifted, despite Sunak's best efforts. And, well, things haven't really shifted in this campaign either. Part of this is likely down to the difficulty of changing the perception of the party in such a short time period. However, it's likely also not helped by the, frankly, terrible campaign Sunak's been having. He started the campaign announcing the election while being drenched and drowned out by the 1997 New Labour campaign anthem. He then had a ton of photo gaffes and even had a day off campaigning when he tried to reset the campaign. Since then, though, things have only gotten worse. Nigel Farage, despite announcing that he'd sit this election out so he could focus on the US election, changed his mind and announced that he would run after all, in the seaside constituency of Clacton. However, he's also come back as leader of the Reform Party, something that has really driven the Reform UK vote share up. In fact, in some polls, Reform UK are only 1 or 2 points behind the Tories. At this point, Sunak surely thought that things couldn't get worse. His campaign was floundering, and pretty much the worst possible thing to happen to his campaign, Farage rejoining the race, had just happened. If this did cross Sunak's mind, though, it would have been premature. Only a few days later, Sunak made the decision to leave the D-Day anniversary commemorations early, in order to get back in time for an interview with ITV's Paul Brand.
Prime Minister.
Gosh, hello.
Good to see you.
Very nice to see you. Hey, sorry to
I'm
have
well,
kept
thank
you.
you. No, not at all. I know you've been in Normandy.
Yeah, it all just ran over. It
course.
was incredible, but it just ran over everything.
I'm sure it was a...
So apologies for keeping you.
No, not at all. I'm sure it was a powerful trip. I mean...
Although he apologised the very next day for this and asked voters the following week to find it in their hearts to forgive him, it seems that this issue had really cut through with voters and made his already bad polling situation even worse. In some of the first polling since this incident, YouGov put the Tories on only 18 points, 20 points behind Labour. The more interesting finding here, though, is that Reform UK and the Liberal Democrats are only just behind the Tories, on 17 points and 15 points respectively. Now, while we can't say definitively that the D-Day issue is what hurt the Tories and helped Reform and the Lib Dems, there are at least some signs to suggest that this is the case. In separate polling from YouGov on Tuesday, it was found that the second most cited news story that voters said they'd heard about last week was that of Sunak leaving the D-Day commemorations early, far more than had simply said that they'd heard of the D-Day commemorations. In fact, this was significantly higher even than the number of people who claimed that the general election campaign was the story they'd heard most about. So, now we know just how bad things are going for Sunak in the campaign, it's worth asking what the effect of this is going to be on the Tories. Well, if the recent YouGov voting intention poll is to be believed, then the Conservatives should start asking themselves existential questions. A few weeks before the election campaign, we made a video about whether the Lib Dems could actually come second in the upcoming election. Although it seemed unlikely, the fact that polls were suggesting it was possible was a clear demonstration of just how bad the polling was for Sunak, and that, if it kept up, they could be in serious danger. A very basic extrapolation of the YouGov poll from earlier would put the Lib Dems ahead of the Tories in terms of seat share, making Ed Davey the leader of the opposition. Now, it's worth pointing out that this isn't the most accurate way of predicting seat share, as it assumes a uniform swing. However, the fact that we're seeing things like this in a campaign period demonstrates things really just aren't getting any better. Even the gold standard MRP polls are showing a historic defeat for the Conservatives. Survation carried out an MRP poll between the 22nd of May and the 2nd of June, and found that Labour would end up with 487 seats, the Tories would end up with 71 seats, and the Liberal Democrats would end up with 43 seats. While the Tories would still end up as the second largest party, this would be one of their worst results ever. Labour, on the other hand, would end up with their largest majority ever. Now, the effect of all this bad polling is that the Conservatives are just out of ideas about what to do. We're now in a situation where high-profile Conservative figures, such as Suella Braverman, are suggesting that their rival, Nigel Farage, should join the Conservatives. For his part, Farage is claiming that Tories should join Reform. So it's possible that we see some movement between Reform and the Tories after the election. This would certainly not, though, be a sign of strength, rather a demonstration that they're in survival mode, desperately trying to do whatever's necessary to remain a dominant political force in the UK. Ultimately then, only time will tell how bad the election is for Sunak. However, there is a very real, albeit slim possibility that they could drop below the Liberal Democrats and become the third party, something that would seriously risk ending the Tory party as we know it. Now, understanding exactly what has or is going to happen here can be a little tricky, requiring you to evaluate lots of information from different, often partial sources. It would be sensible then to begin improving your critical thinking skills so that you can keep sharp and better understand what's going on. And well, our sponsor Brilliant.org can help you do just that. Brilliant is the online learning platform that's designed specifically to teach you everything from maths, data analysis, programming, and AI from the ground up. You don't need a fancy degree or to have dedicated hundreds of hours to studying any of these. All you need is a device with an internet connection and a few spare minutes a day. And with your spare few minutes, you'll learn by actually doing, with Brilliant providing hands-on lessons that let you play around with concepts, a method that has been shown to be 6 times more effective than just watching lectures. What makes this even better is that this content is created by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, and professionals from MIT, Caltech, Duke, Microsoft, and more. You can try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days. Just click on the link in the description. That way you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription.